My name is Romy Beard. I'm head of publisher relations at Kronos Hub, which is an open access management platform that aims to bring different stakeholders in the industry together: publishers, institutions, libraries, funders, different players. And today we're here to discuss how we can communicate better or make communication around open access and other types of accesses a little bit clearer. The webinar is being recorded, so if you're watching this later, thanks for watching. There's a chat and a Q&A, so if you have any questions, please feel free to pop them in there and we'll get to your questions during the discussion round at the end. So I've got three great speakers with me here today. First of all, we'll hear from Lisa Janik Hinchcliffe and Kaylin Nolan from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign to talk about a recent study that they had published in the Scholarly Kitchen around different indicators of open access and how that can be really confusing for authors. For readers rather. And then we'll hear from Yen Trin, who has just been awarded her PhD last week. Congratulations. And she also works as a designer at Kronos Hub. So she will talk a little bit about, her take on things as a designer and how she would read things to maybe consider as we're having this discussion about making things a bit more consistent and coherent for readers. So in terms of the format, I'll have a quick introduction and then I'll hand over to Kaylin and Lisa to do their presentation and then to Yen. And there should be plenty of time for discussion and Q&A at the end, and also perhaps a little bit of next steps, what can be done to address things and moving forward. So again, please pop your questions in at any time and we'll get to them in the second half of the webinar. So at Kronos Hub, which is more of a publishing platform than a reading platform, I do a lot with authors that get very confused during the publishing process on what kind of language is displayed on different publishers' website when it comes to publishing, what licenses they're being used, do I publish open and closed, and there's a lot of different confusing language around that. So as a company, we've worked really hard to make that easier from a design and a language perspective, and we'll hear about that today. It's not just one or the other, but today we'll focus mostly on the confusion around the reading experience for readers, both in terms of open access and closed access and what's free to read. But just wanted to throw that out there, that it's not often just one or the other, but it's a combination of these problems, isn't it? So without further ado, I'll hand over to Kaylin and Lisa. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great, and good morning from Central Illinois to wherever you are in the world and the time of day. My name is Lisa Janik Hinchcliffe, and I'm a professor in the University Library at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. It was my pleasure to work with Kaylin on this project as part of her graduate degree in Library and Information Science here at the university. A question I had been pondering for a long time and was pleased when Kaylin was willing to take it on to do systematic investigation into the way that platforms indicate open access in the user interface. And what we found, I think, has been very interesting to the industry and points to some things that we need to improve going forward in order to have a better reader experience. So I'm going to turn it over to Kaylin to tell you about the study that we did and the results that we found.
So hi, thank you, Lisa, for introducing me. Like Lisa said, I am Kaylin Nolan, and I am a graduate assistant at the iSchool at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, which is the School of Library and Information Sciences. And I'm going to be talking a bit about our project and talking about what these open access indicators actually are. So a little bit of background. Publishing platforms use indicators such as standardized text or symbols to indicate whether articles in hybrid journals, so journals that publish both open so that everyone can read them, or subscription, meaning that you have to pay or be part of an institution to access them. So whether articles in those open access journals or hybrid journals are open access. Despite these indicators, we noticed user confusion about whether they have access to certain articles. So despite these indicators, and we wanted to figure out why. So a little bit about our research. We then decided to conduct a pilot investigation into the indicators used on a sample of platforms. And we were guided by 2 research questions. The first being, how do publishing platforms indicate which articles are open access? And is there consistency in the indicators used within and across scholarly publisher platforms? Okay, so we decided to pick 5 scholarly publishers, 5 major publishers for our analysis. As some of the largest academic publishers, their platforms are likely to be used at least at some point by the typical faculty member or college student user. And the 5 that we selected were Elsevier, Springer, Wiley, Sage, and Taylor and Francis. And like we said, these are very large publishers that are used for institutions that faculty members and college students will often come into contact with at some point. And at some point, we hope to expand the study beyond these, but this seemed like a good place to start for our field. So we decided to do 2 types of searches to see, to check for cross-platform and within platform consistency. So we did a table of contents investigation where we downloaded a current journal list for each publisher, selecting the first hybrid journal that published in the year 2020. And then we went to the table of contents for the issue, and we noted how open access is indicated for the listed articles. And we also did a keyword search investigation where we conducted a keyword search using the term pandas, which brings up articles from multiple disciplines, including programming and animal science and biology, et cetera. And then we looked for open access indicators in the results to find an open access article among those listed. And then we selected the indicator that was used and we noted it. So we documented the results for each type of search, the table of contents and the keyword search, the open access indicators that were used in each, and to differentiate as well between free, open, and subscription access. We then recorded whether a paywall or other indicators were used. So were there indicators for if something was not open access, or was there another kind of access? And then we captured screenshots or saved as a PDF, each displayed screen used in analysis. So initially we did our data collection between May and June 2022, but then there was some interface changes on the platforms. So we revisited the data in September and October 2022 to reflect the most recent results. So what we found, there were mostly internally consistent open access indicators, meaning that platforms pretty much use the same indicator in both kinds of searches. So both in the table of contents and the keyword search. And so that was really good news. That means that, people who are on one platform at least can know that that is what open access means on that platform. However, indicators varied greatly across publishing platforms. So I don't know if you saw the first slide, but there were a lot of different ways that the platforms indicated open access. And we decided to look into each one and show you a side-by-side analysis so that you can see kind of what we were looking at and why users may think it was confusing. So first, we started with Elsevier. So Elsevier used a green dot with text reading open access on its open access articles, both in the table of contents and the keyword search. So that was the image on the left of your screen. The same green dot also appeared with the label full text access. And there was no key or anything to differentiate between the 2 different kinds of access. But as you can see, it was the same green dot. So it didn't really talk about what's the difference between open access and full text access. Can everybody access it, or is it just people that have institutional access or some other kind of access? And it was important to note that whenever the green dot appeared, there was also a PDF icon and the text download PDF, which led to the assumption that the user could download the content that was associated with that indicator. So Sage was our next publisher. And in the table of contents, Sage's indicator is an orange unlocked icon with the text open access and the same PDF or EPUB download icon. That is the image on the top. The same indicator were used in the keyword search and the table of contents search. However, there were other kinds of access that were indicated on the platform as well. So another type of access was indicated by a green unlocked icon and text that said free access. That would be the second image with the PDF or EPUB download icon. And then Sage also overtly labeled non-open or non-free articles with the label restricted access and a black locked icon. And as you can see, there's kind of different imagery that is used on the top with the orange open access symbol. You kind of have a combination lock, but the two images on the bottom are padlocks. And again, it doesn't, there's nothing to tell the user what the difference between open access or free access is. Likely they know what restricted access means, but maybe they don't know why they don't have access. So that was something to note. So our next platform was Springer. And Springer kind of had a little bit of internal inconsistency. As you can see, both of these images were used for open access. However, it did have consistency in the use of color and obviously the use of text. So the keyword search showed an orange box with text that said open access, and the table of contents search resulted in open access written in orange text. So you can kind of see the consistency that they were going for, but they're not consistent in the use of background, and there's no explanation on why they do this. So that was something to think about as well. For Taylor and Francis, they indicated open access using an orange triangle with an unlocked icon. So again, we're seeing this unlocked combination lock image, but it's in an orange triangle. And this is consistent in both the table of contents and the keyword search. And then also the term open access appears next to the triangle as a mouse over. So if you clicked over it or moved your mouse over it, you would see open access. But if you did not do that, you would just see the orange triangle. And then there was also another indicator, which was a green triangle with a check mark that appears in the displays. And the mouse over shows text that reads free access instead. And there's nothing to differentiate between the two or explain why one is free access and one is open access, or what each one means. So finally, we have Wiley, and they had 3 different indicators that I'll talk about. Their indicator for open access was in purple text that read open access and had an unlocked icon. And this was used in both the table of contents and the keyword search. However, there were 2 other kinds of access that were indicated. The first was indicated by blue text that says free access, accompanied by an unlocked blue icon. So again, we're hearing that word free. We observed that Wiley does use the unlocked green icon seen on other platforms, the image that is on the bottom. However, it does so accompanied by a green label that reads full access. So we're getting another term here. And this is when the user has subscription-based access to the content, but it does not explain that that is why, right? Like you don't know if you're logged in through your institution. Sometimes you are logged in through the VPN, but you may not know that is where you are. I experienced that a lot throughout collecting this data. But yeah, 3 different kinds of access with the same unlocked icon. What does it all mean? So obviously, there are some implications to there being so many different kinds of ways to indicate open access. So all the platforms had had internal consistency. So they had the same icons within their platform, even though they had multiple ways of indicating that a user had access to the article, but they differed significantly from one another. There were some similarities, such as the unlocked or unlocked imagery and the padlock or the combination lock, but differences in color and shapes as well as placement were notable. When users are navigating through multiple platforms during their research process, not having universal symbolism for open access has the potential to slow them down or create confusion. Also, what kind of access? We heard a lot of different terms to describe that a user had access, but there's an absence of information to help the user distinguish between open, free, full, available, etc. access. Sometimes it wasn't clear whether the user had free access or full access to an article because they're affiliated with an institution that subscribes to that article or that journal, or because the article is open for reading for everyone. Indeed, we understand that open access is free, so it's a kind of free access. However, the inconsistency in terminology is likely to cause confusion because open access is a type of free access. So a couple of examples of this confusion. If you were logged in through an institution on Sage, the term available access appears accompanied by a green unlocked icon. Collaborating scholars who are accessing the same platform in different ways, such as unauthenticated or authenticated versus unentitled versus authenticated or entitled, will see different indicators for the same article. Elsevier's green dot also was associated with the open access and free access terminology, as well as the full text access terminology, which reflects a subscription-based entitlement. So if people are collaborating and they're accessing the article in different ways, they may see different images, and this might result in them not knowing if they can access the article and if they can use it for their research and for their collaboration. So why do we care? Well, different groups may care for different reasons. The users might not know that they can access articles without hitting a paywall or per article fee, meaning that if they don't want to pay the fee, they don't want to read the article. So if they don't know that they have access to the article without paying, they might pass it by and read a different article on a different platform. For the publishers, communicating what type of access a user has for an article may influence the article's reach. So obviously, if users don't want to use the article because they think they have to pay for it, that will influence the reach. Less people will read the article. And librarians in our field, reliance on these indicators is something that we have for assisting patrons using these platforms. So if the platforms are confusing to us, how are we supposed to help other patrons and people who are asking for our help to access the information properly? So it affects multiple user groups. So building on these findings, outside of librarianship and publishing, terms like open access, full text access, available access, and free access are likely unfamiliar. Better explanations of OA indicators or a shared taxonomy of indicators across the industry would decrease user confusion and improve the user experience. So hopefully in the future, we can find a way to be more consistent across platforms, or at least give users a key so that they can differentiate between all the different kinds of access. And that's our presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think we'll hand over straight to Ian, and then we'll be looking at questions. You should be able to control it now.
Yeah, I think. Yes. Okay. So let me first just present myself. My name is Ian Chen. I'm a user experience and interface designer at Kronos Hub. So I work on translating user insights into design for the platform, for Kronos Hub's platform. I have a background in engineering design, and I'm specialized in design also, user perception and experience of designed things. So in relation to today's topic, I'm going to be talking about visual consistency with respect to conceptual coherence, which conceptual coherence is what I did my research in, and kind of explain why absolute consistency can be dangerous to design perception, and we have to consider coherence even if we consider consistency. So I believe that one of the underlying reasons to the confusion with open access and kinds of access indicators is that we don't really have a good conceptualization for what open access is and what it isn't. We use the term and the concept behind it kind of loosely, but at the same time, it's quite specific. And that kind of influences the way that we represent it visually. So, for example, I can't control it. Oh, I can. So, for example, in writing the term, there are different platforms, like the study also showed with the visual indicators. Different platforms, they use different ways of writing, or they write it in different ways. So, on some platforms, they capitalize the first letters, some they don't, and then there's others that even hyphenate the word. And then there's Springer, which is one of the cases that were used in the study presented earlier. They do two things. So even on one page, two different paragraphs, they capitalize the first letters in one paragraph and then they don't in the other paragraph. And so that makes it so that the overall perception of open access is like, do we have to be specific about it or do we not? Like, are there rules for it or are there not? And so that kind of reinforces the problem that we have with the visual indicators for open access and other kinds of accesses. And from a design perspective, if we have to be able to use visual indicators that are understandable for the user, we need some sort of guidelines that can help us, on one hand, restrict for consistency, but at the same time, it has to be flexible enough that we could implement it in different user interfaces, because different contexts require different visual representations, even if it's of the same concept. So like I said, on one hand, it is so specific. Open access, for example, and the kinds of accesses that there are, they denote something very specific. Like when we say open access, we understand just this one concept in general, which is different from other phrases or terms that they're more general. But at the same time, the way that we visually represent it doesn't make it as such. Like we saw earlier, some use a dot, some use an open padlock, some use closed padlock. It's very confusing in that sense. So is it specific or is it not? And like here, I'm just providing the examples from earlier, from the study that was presented earlier. All of these are supposed to indicate the same thing, but why are they so different? So the two concepts that I'm going to be talking about in this context of kinds of accesses indicators is consistency. So in the study earlier, it was identified that there's a lack of consistency, which contributes to the confusion, because consistency is what helps the user learn something, retain it, and then recognize it after. So in general, in design, besides consistency and other design principles, we also consider something that we call coherence, which is the way that something complements something else. So in general, we can kind of define them as, so consistency, we would use that to refer to the expression of similar things in similar ways. So if we go the extreme way and say, if something is absolutely consistent, then it would be the expression of the same things in the same ways, or really extreme, it would be the expression of identical things in identical ways. So that's like extreme consistency. Coherence, on the other hand, we use that to refer to the expression of similar things in complementary ways. Like I said, it's necessary in design that where if you use an element in different contexts, then it can't just be the same in every context. So I'll just show you with an example here. I have a mock logo or a mock icon of open access. If I don't change anything about it except for the location, and so I'm keeping it very, very consistent across different contexts, it could be something like this. We tag the title of an element. What if the title is longer? Or if we tag an item on a list of items, what if there's something that is physically close to it and it also needs the tag? Or we tag it with other tags in an element. What if the color scheme is different from our design? So that's when consistent is really extreme, right? So if I try to keep consistency to some degree, but at the same time consider the context in which we present the visual. So in this case, I'm considering the possibility that the title may be long. I keep the color, I keep the icon, I remove the text, but it makes space for a long title. In this case, I remove the icon because, like, just for simplicity, it's simple, and for the space, to reduce cluttering, and also I reduce the size. to make space for two physically closed items, then it could look something like this. We could also just create it in a different color, but all of the visual elements otherwise are the same. Or if it means something, the fact that it is colored and everything else is not, you could still also keep the color. So taken together, these are the ones that I used when I kept consistency, but also consider coherence. Based on those, you can create a set of icons or indicators that can be used in different environments. And if you need, for example, there was free access, full access. If you need variants of those, you can extend it to include different variants, but they also have some similarity to your base marker. So the fact that Springer, for example, used these two different ways to indicate open access is not necessarily a bad thing, because they have some commonality. For example, they're using the same color. It may be of different hues or tints, but it's the same color. The typeface seems to be the same. The weight of them seem to be the same. So maybe the fact that even that they use different indicators has a purpose. Maybe it doesn't make sense to use something that is in a box in one setting, but it makes more sense to use something that is without a box in that setting. So it depends on the context. So I've suggested that we don't have, like, one of the bigger problems that I believe contribute to this is that we don't have the concept of kinds of accesses, because it's very wishy-washy. What we have right now is quite wishy-washy, which I believe it makes it so that people who use or who make indicators for kinds of accesses, they feel like they can just do whatever they want. Like, they can write it however they want. They can create whatever icon for it they want. And that creates this across platform confusion. But at the same time, like I suggested, it can't be so rigid that you can't fit it into different contexts, because different pages look different, different platforms, they have to adhere to their branding as well. So maybe they have different color schemes, they use different font sizes. There are many differences in different contexts where if you want to use something to indicate just one common concept, it needs to kind of be able to fit into those differences. So that kind of approach, with the kind of approach that I've suggested here, is similar to the way that brands, they design logos. So they try to keep some kind of consistency within them, but at the same time, they're different to signify different things. For example, if we had open access, free access, and full access, and within that, they also, oh, sorry, I'm not moving here. So within that, they also provide guidelines on how to use these. So if, for example, if you have a dark background, this is how you can present it. If you have a light background, or if you have an image background, this is how you can present it. And that's, if that could be done, because that's consistency, right? If that could be done across platforms, where if everyone that uses an image background, for example, they present the icon and the maybe accompanying text in a box, then that would reduce at least the confusion. Once the user has been familiarized with it in one context where it's presented in that way, and then even if they move platform to a different context, if they see the image, oh, it's still in a box with an icon with some accompanying text. So the question is then, based on what rules are we gonna create this architecture of indicators? How is it gonna be done, and who is gonna be responsible for it? Because right now there's nobody who has like formal ownership of the concept. So we need to have we need to build some common ground as a fundamental base to create this, where we can all agree that this is how we want to indicate open access and other kinds of accesses for research publication.
Thank you so much, Ian. That was great. Any immediate thoughts from Kaylin or Lisa? I mean, you've talked about the need for consistency, and I think Ian's put it in a slightly different angle of, well, we don't just need one thing, but we need a set of, agree on the language, agree on the icons, but then within that, there needs to be flexibility to be adapted for different use cases. What are your thoughts on that?
So I think what we can see actually is that Ian's, colleagues who are user experience people on each platform have actually done on platform what's suggested, right? That there is a coherence on a given platform. In fact, there's consistency on 4 of the 5, right? So the question isn't whether it's not that this isn't there. The issue is actually that it's not consistent or coherent across platforms. And then the other thing is we literally do not actually know when something is being tagged like free. What does it, we kind of can figure out what open means. Caitlin and I poked around a lot enough that if you see JH's comment in the chat saying, oh, there's also this gold, green, there's gratis, libre. We believe that in most cases, libre is what is causing the full open access icon to appear. When it is gratis OA, or which is also now in the literature called bronze OA, it is coming up as free access. Mm-hmm. Now, there is something where the Creative Commons licenses are also interplaying with this. It seems possible that at least one platform is only putting open access if it's their CC BY, and anything else, CC BY NCND or something like that, is getting the free access. So this sort of all reflects the fact that we actually don't have a set terminology either to know what is really open access. We have conventions, but once those conventions hit iconograph and user interface, it's just really, really messy. But we believe that in general, open is being used for the libre in Peter Suber's terminology, the full OA, and free is being used for gratis. However, there's also this full text or full access, which sometimes seems to relate to having a subscription and other times seems to relate to the fact that you've logged in, so you're recognized as a subscribing institution, but the article itself is either open or libre or gratis. So it's sort of a trumping of which icon appears based on whether you've authenticated. We were not able to document that in enough where we could put that into an article saying this is what's happening. All we could do was go off the iconograph, but it's a lot going on there. Yeah.
And you think there's a role for different organizations to perhaps get together and say, let's agree on something, let's come up with some recommendations, both in terms of language and icons, and can we agree as an industry on having a set that I can agree on it and then get others to adopt it and be consistent?
Yeah, so I mean, we have a lot of experience. In fact, some people ask, do we have any other experience, right, with this in the industry? There's actually quite a bit that if you start looking at these interfaces that we've agreed upon, if you will, not just within library scholarly publishing, but if you ever see the little diskette icon that, is a little diskette, we understand that that means save. Why we understand that, if you're not old enough to remember diskettes, is an interesting question, but we understand that. We know the little printer icon means print. And we have other examples in the industry where we have things that publishers have agreed upon as a standard, like the seamless access icon, the get FTR icon data set. So there are examples of this. What it needs is some industry body that would sort of take on and say, well, we're going to put our hand up, do a community process that articulates this. And there are two that have been suggested in response to the Scholarly Kitchen article that we published. One is NISO, and I personally think that would make sense given that NISO has the journal article versions taxonomy as one of their, it's a standard or a guideline or something. The other one would be for the STM Association, which is where Get FTR and Seamless Access are living. So we do have two associations. I think it partially is dependent, honestly, on the degree to which the community says this is important. Lisa and Kaylin think it's important, but we need, we have other people here, but that's something that we have to be communicating, that this is an actual issue. And we probably can't depend on end users complaining to the publishers, because they're doing their best to make sense of these icons, and the fact that they're getting it wrong, they often don't realize, because the result of getting it wrong is typically they bypass the article that they would have access to.
Mm-hmm. We have an interesting comment here from someone, from Helen Juice from Sage, who said they did a lot of UX research and user research before confirming the icons. So they seem to have taken users into account when making decisions. But obviously, as librarians, you have experience as well of people coming to complain or ask questions. So I would think it should be certainly an organization that isn't, publishers need to implement it, but when it comes to deciding what the language should be, it needs to involve both, like all of them, really, all the stakeholders, both librarians who deal with users asking questions and not just hear the positive, also the negative feedback about the confusion, as well as the publishers and then end users themselves.
Yeah, I don't think we have any question that individual publishers are doing their best with their platforms. And I would absolutely imagine and know, because I've talked to since then or other times, that every single one of these platforms is putting a great deal of effort into the user experience. No one publisher can own the cross-platform experience.
No.
So that's one of the issues. So I mean, for what it's worth, Sage is actually one of the redesigns that caused us to have to redo all our data collection. But we weren't mad. We were pleased to see that they had made the improvements, because honestly, they were improvements. So just kudos to Helen and her colleagues. But it's across the industry is the question. And then also I will say, and I would just encourage every publisher to look, do you have a web page somewhere that if we Googled, what does this icon mean on your platform, we could at least get the definition? I'm not saying an end user is going to do that, but a librarian will do that. Mm-hmm. And the help files are just remarkably empty of what these symbols mean.
Kaylin, you mentioned one of them had the mouse over. If you hovered over it with your mouse, it had an explanation. Who was that?
That was Taylor and Francis with the triangles.
Would that be a solution?
I mean, potentially, but maybe they could put text in there about, like, this is what open access means, this is what free access means, in that mouse over. I'm not sure how that would work with the interface itself. Kind of like Yen was showing, it would depend on the amount of space that they had, the amount of the title length and everything like that. But yeah, I think if platforms agreed that was how they were going to do it, that would be wonderful. But I'm sure there is barriers for that as well.
I think if we, I'm saying we, but whoever would like to be responsible, the stakeholders who find this important and take interest in this, could agree on some sort of definition for each of these. And I don't think a mouse over a solution with a temporary modal floating above the page itself, I don't think that's a problem at all. I think that's a great idea, where you don't have to go somewhere else to read the definition for something where it's not your primary purpose to be there. It's supposed to be an indication, a simple indication of something that you're looking at. So I think a mouse over option would be good, user interface wise.
I think that one of the challenges with mouse overs is that they don't work well on mobile.
Yeah,
right?
sure.
Mouse overs don't work well on mobile, and they also create accessibility problems for people with disabilities. Right. So Personally, I think anytime there's only an icon, it's actually somewhat problematic unless, especially for people with disabilities, unless there is very clear attention to creating a screen reader experience that is different from the visual description. So that's just one thing I would hesitate to be too enthusiastic about mouse overs for accessibility, but also then you need a different mobile design because
I mean,
that's work on mobile.
That's very common. For example, with drop downs, we don't use the, or we discourage the use of those on mobile. Then you will have a different mechanic that works in place of the drop down function, right? So I believe in the same way we could do that, because it depends, of course, on, because from my understanding, many of these kinds of accesses, they can be kind of detailed. So if you would have to go somewhere else just to be able to read what this one term means, because you have to understand what it means for the item that you're looking at, that's kind of a lengthy process, and the user might even not do it at all. So if there could be like a short description that's ready on hand around where the icon itself is, I think that will be more useful.
So if I could actually address a question that I see in the Q&A, Romy, from Robert, about, okay, do users care why an article is open? So first of all, I want to say, I think users care whether they can get to an article, right? That's the first part of it. So whether it's open or not is actually not necessarily part, right? They want to know, can they get to it? And I think that in many cases, users are fine just knowing that they can get to it. The real issue here is if the interface isn't communicating clearly that they can get to it, that's a problem. Not everyone looks at an icon of a lock, even when it's unlocked, and interprets that as I can get to this. They might interpret it as I might be able to get to it, right? I might be able to unlock it. But the second thing I would say is, this is still an issue if you are in cross-institutional collaborations. So when you send that link to somebody else and then they're like, I can't get to this, right? Now you don't know, now as a user, one of your use cases is collaboration and cross-institutional collaboration. So yes, I agree that they may not care why, but they, caring and needing to know are not necessarily the same thing. So there's just some extra complications there. Robert also makes the point that a number of this may actually be driven by the publishing platform, Hindawi, Adapon, Highwire, Chronos, etc. Just to answer the question, we did not look at the publishing platform level. We were looking at the level where the user would interface with the material. Obviously, if a cross-industry group began to try and solve this, they would need to involve publishing platform providers in that conversation, because if those are driving what options publishers and then eventually journal editors have, then that's where the problem stems. So it would just be a matter of kind of moving that upstream in the design process to figure out where does the change have to be implemented.
Yeah. I want to come back to your earlier comment, Lisa, about sending a link to someone at a different institution. So are you saying that if as a user, I can see clearly this is open access, I can share the link, I know my colleague will be able to get access? Whereas if it's something else, I might be wary that it might not get access.
No, I don't think you'll necessarily as an end user be wary. I think you'll send it and then they won't be able to get to it.
Yeah, but that problem, regardless of how clear how clearly the indicator is, that problem still persists with anything that's closed access.
Correct. And in this study, we're only looking. Yeah. So, and again, but I just want to remind you that at least one platform deprecates the open access indicator for a full text access statement. And so you as the end user actually no longer have an indication that you are getting it because it's open.
Yeah.
So yes, you are correct. But again, this comes down to how it's implemented in the interface. And I just want to remind everyone that everyone probably on this call today has knowledge like leaps and bounds and high above our average user who's a researcher who uses these platforms all the time. Kaylin and I are teaching on a regular basis, college freshmen, college seniors even. These are not folks who have heard the terminology open access before even. And we know from other studies that even among the researcher community, understanding of what the term open access means is not high.
Yeah, that's what I mean with, I think it's good to involve like end users directly, but you guys as librarian, you have that experience of teaching people that, even publishers doing surveys might not reach those kind of people that you're in touch with, that you're teaching, that you can see that confusion on their face. So in terms of an organization that can take things forward, I think really does need to involve librarians like yourselves who are involved in a day-to-day basis with the people that are confused about it.
I think also that the fact that we don't currently have one specific indicator for each kind of access, it also means that the user they're not stuck on, if I don't see this, I don't understand it as that specific context or concept. So they can learn still. So if we push one specific indicator and say, this is what indicates open access, nothing else, they can also learn that.
Kaylin, there's another question that I'm not sure if we covered, whether you want to define table of contents versus keyword search. I think Ian had some good examples of table of contents, but perhaps you can elaborate a little bit on that or question.
Yeah, so we don't have a visual. I don't know if I should. I don't know if I have a visual example, but I can explain it maybe in a different way. So the table of contents search is where we went into the journal platform itself. Like we said, we went through a list of journals that were hybrid and also publishing in the year 2020. And we selected the first one in that list. And then we went to the table of contents of that journal. So like the list of the first issue with all of the different articles within that issue, we found the image that was had an open access indicator, and that was what we used. So the search was through the actual journal itself. And for the keyword search, we just went into the platform. So we just went straight into Wiley or Sage or Taylor and Francis, and we searched the word pandas. And then that would bring up images for that kind of search. So it wasn't in the journal, it was on the platform. And that was just how we tested to see if the platforms themselves had internal consistency. So whether they had the same symbol for open access in the table of contents when we searched for the through the individual journal or on the platform itself outside of a specific journal. So was it the platform or was it the specific journal?
Thanks,
I
Kaylin.
hope that answers your question.
Yeah. I have another question for you. We touched on this briefly. You've mentioned that there was a lot of times the PDF symbol that you could download. What about licenses, like whether it's CC BY or CC BY variant? Because that is one way that technically you can differentiate between open and just free to read, because a lot of time free to read doesn't have a license. Is that something that you think is important to have listed on either the table of contents? Indicate it? Would that help?
So correct me if I'm wrong, Lisa, but we have another student that's building on this study who's actually looking at that herself. We actually had a couple of situations where we were confused about symbolism that was used for the licensing. And we weren't sure if that was an open access symbol or if it was about the license on the article and on the journal. I do think that's important, but her study will dig deeper into that. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about background on that, Lisa.
I would just say, Romy, that actually a lot of what we found that's free access does have a license.
Okay.
So depending on the platform, it doesn't have necessarily the CC BY license. Mm-hmm. It might have a CC BY NC ND. Mm-hmm. And whether a publisher tags that open or free or full is varied from what Kaylin and I saw just anecdotally. As with much research, as you're doing one study, you start to see these other things that you're like, wait a second. And so we had to constrain ourselves so that Kaylin could do this project in the time before she graduates, right? And say, no, we're looking at the open access indicators. So have me back with my next student in 6 months. Watch for the scholarly kitchen piece. And collectively, we have a poster proposal into a future industry conference to bring these two projects next to each other to see. So, you know, I think one of the things I want to thank Yenno for helping me is this notion of the difference between coherence and consistency, and how maybe we need to think about, and NISO or STM would probably do this, because STM has done this for seamless access, for example, and Get FTR, you know, a set of icons that has coherence. So the interface designer has some flexibility, but again, creates content, you know, gives the cross-platform consistency, coherence that no individual publisher or platform can be responsible for.
Thanks, Lisa. So you've talked a little bit about next step. You said there's 2 organizations that are looking at that. Are they likely to work together on this, or what do you see as immediate next steps?
I know that I've had conversations in email with and on the post comments on the Scholarly Kitchen from both NISO and STM, but whether either of them is picking it up, again, I think this will come back to whether this is seen from the community as important and valuable. It might not, I mean, collectively, everyone might be like, Lisa, Kaylin, this is interesting, but not important to act on. You know, there's an interesting additional thing, if I can just say, we only chose to look at hybrid context, right? Where you were seeing open access articles next to subscription articles. There's an interesting thing about what happens when you go to an all OA publisher. Typically, but not always, they don't indicate that the individual articles are open because the entire journal is open. But we might also think about what that means then for a user who has been on one of these other platforms that suddenly hits PLOS, where everything is open.
And they might not know that.
But do they know that if they're used to seeing these icons at the article level? So there's a complexity here for us as an industry that is different than the complexity that's dealt with on a given platform, which is why I just want to repeat and want to make sure people understand. Our research does not indicate that, you know, PLOS, AGU, you know, any given publisher is not succeeding in this area. Our research actually indicates that on platform, they're doing a great job. It's the cross-platform that users are not just on a single platform where things are falling apart. If we don't care about cross-platform experience, then that doesn't matter, right? We can just be really happy in our verticals. But if we think there's a reason to be concerned about cross-platform experience, then we're going to need a cross-industry group, because no one publisher or platform can be responsible for the user experience across platforms.
Absolutely. And did you look at aggregators at all, platforms that aggregate content from different publishers, and what indicators they use?
We did not.
That'd be interesting as well, because there you obviously have a mix, and like, do they put a symbol next to the PLOS articles, for example? Sure they would, right?
I mean, anecdotally, I can tell you that once full OA journals articles migrate into discovery layers and the like, then they get tagged as the articles are open, because that discovery layer is a hybrid environment where they're indexing both. But we didn't look at the aggregator, so I don't want to pretend that's in our data set.
Yeah, and I think there was a comment about that as well. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that. You said you've got some proposals for any industry events. Have you got anything upcoming where you're presenting this research?
Not yet.
Yet?
We're
Not
hoping.
confirmed yet?
Not confirmed. So the
Okay.
proposal is in, so it'd be premature because, you know,
Yeah.
obviously it's always a lot of proposals in.
Yeah. Well,
so.
I keep my fingers crossed for you. It'd be great to, yeah, to see you and give you a chance to discuss that with the industry.
Yeah, and I think since in our proposal, it's to bring the CC licensing to that conversation as well.
Yeah.
Because it appears to be driving some of the icons that are displayed.
Yeah. No, I think that'd be really interesting to hear you chat about that and see the combination of that. So hopefully see you back in 6 months with your other student. Any other final comments from either of you lovely ladies? No, I can't see any other questions in the chat. So I'll just wrap up. Thank you so much for taking part. Thanks everyone who joined the webinar or was watching it later. If you want to stay up to date with upcoming webinars, please join ChronosHub newsletter and or the events list. We've got a couple of researcher focused webinars coming up on open access requirements for funders, open access agreements, what those includes. And then our next kind of industry event is on the 2nd of March, where we talk about author experience together with Colleen Scollins and John Chalice. So that'd be great if you want to join me for that. So yeah, thanks very much. Any other questions, please feel free to get in touch and I'll pass it over to our speakers. Thank you.